China. If you're hearing a reference to the Middle Kingdom in the news today, it's probably about trade or military capability. And we talk a lot about those matters on this program. But economic competition with China is more than an escalating tariff ladder, though the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, was pretty boss with his reference to the escalation ladder in his pocket.
They've actually given us a list of what comes from the U.S. that is valuable to them. And, you know, I can tell you, I do have an escalation ladder in my back pocket, and we're very anxious not to have to use it.
China is also competing with the United States by aiming to digitally connect the world. This is very important. Huawei is China's state-backed enterprise to run a wide range of 5G and other digital solutions. Huawei is even looking to rival tech giant NVIDIA on AI chip products. American companies, Google, Microsoft, and others compete with Huawei in the United States and globally for market share. And they don't always win that competition. Even here in our nation, a surprising amount of our country has become reliant on China for connectivity. I was shocked as a congressman to learn that 25% of rural America is using Huawei, according to the Rural Wireless Association. 25%? Is this safe? With what we've learned about China's big data projects, their AI facial and voice recognition technology, and their desire to dominate the world through data, why would we have China building the rails for communication within our country? The answer? It's cheaper. China subsidizes Huawei to connect us so that they can ultimately control us. I believe that this is in line with the CCP's concepts toward unrestricted warfare. We see how China uses control in their own country to effectuate the most full-service censorship regime on the planet Earth. During COVID and following the 2020 election, we saw the Biden administration bring us frighteningly close to China on censorship practices. True things were censored if they referenced vaccine side effects. The Hunter Biden laptop story was censored because big tech just wanted it to be. The CCP would have been proud of how the Biden-Harris White House tried to control information and punish online dissent. I'm here at One America News to fight censorship, as I shared with you on our first broadcast. The massive censorship that occurred during the Biden administration must be remediated. It must be undone. That's why I'm here at One America News. Those who've been ripped from the digital world must get the freedom of reach to animate our values around freedom of speech. Here at OAN, we were taken off the airwaves unfairly for sinister reasons, and Trump's return must parallel OAN's return. There's a critically important entity of government on the front lines of the fight against censorship and for a renewed American vigor to battle China in communication infrastructure. It's the FCC, or Federal Communications Commission. This body oversees how communications technology gets deployed in America. They review the public interest served in media mergers, and they can be a powerhouse. President Trump understands the importance of the FCC and has appointed some warriors to the commission to win against China and vindicate free speech against censorship. Nathan Simington has joined the FCC via a Trump appointment, and he's with us now. Commissioner, how do you look at the Chinese company Huawei? Should Huawei technology be used in the United States?
Oh, okay. That's a question, all right. So the short answer is no. The long answer is that Huawei has received probably something between $100 and $150 billion in Chinese government subsidies and free real estate and other assets. Huawei is not really required to make a profit. And so, you know, it's worth looking at Huawei and considering, is this really a telecom company in the normal sense, or is it a strategic investment? Now, I don't mean to say that they don't live in some kind of a competitive environment onshore in China. There are other Chinese telecom companies too, and Huawei makes some fantastic products. The problem is that Chinese national law means that those fantastic products have got to be open to civil-military fusion and therefore can be weaponized and leveraged by the Chinese state. Put it all together, and I don't want Huawei in the United States, and I don't think anyone else should either. Not until we're sure that it's safe, and I think those would be very, very heavy assurances.
And the fact that they don't have to make a profit and are so heavily subsidized, does that inform your thinking about the safety or about the military utility of that technology connecting a lot of rural America today?
A famous writer once described it as cheaper than an aircraft carrier, and I think that's a really interesting point. It's like a military expenditure, except the nice thing is you get a phone system too. You can even sell it in other countries, and then you're into their phone systems. So the difficulty is Huawei really does make good products, and they make turnkey products that are easily activated and run by a relatively unskilled plant of workers in some cases. And they're branching into industrial technologies. If you go on their website, you can find Huawei products for mines, Huawei products for fulfillment centers. So, at this point, it's way beyond just the phone. When I look at that potential, you mentioned rural America. That's a really interesting one. If you look at carriers and at specific deployments to which Huawei has sold equipment in the United States, there's an odd focus on getting near to the contours of military facilities and other sensitive locations. So, we might reasonably ask, is there some additional motivation here besides just ensuring that rural America has good telecom service?
You and Gavin Wax recently penned an essay in the Daily Caller regarding competition with China. You said, quote, "We must discard the fantasy that subsidies are simply handouts and that government support for domestic industry equates to protectionism." So how should we think about subsidies to businesses, if not as handouts?
Yeah, it's a great question because you can easily see how a subsidy program can go wrong. It's a very normal thing that a country will run an import substitution policy, and that just means paying domestic producers to make more expensive, worse products and sell them into a captive market. None of us want that. We like consumer choice in America. We like competition. But the difficulty is there are some things that are fundamentals for infrastructure, and in those cases, you can't exactly expect normal free market competition to apply. There's a natural monopoly in power generation, for example. There used to be natural monopolies in the phone system. That's broken up now, but for 70 years, it was the basis of how we thought about regulating the Bell system and monopoly AT&T. Up until the Reagan presidency. So you put it all together, and it's never quite as free a market as you might think. Now, Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, famously wrote that you have to subsidize some industries. He specifically was talking about shipbuilding in order to maintain your military function. And that makes sense. If Adam Smith's England had depended on adversarial France for wood and nails and sailcloth, then they'd probably be speaking French in London today. And likewise, there are a lot of industries in the United States where all of the key inputs have wound up being sourced to China. Not necessarily because China was ultimately better at making them, but because the Chinese government made strategic decisions to onshore those industries, regardless of normal questions of profit and loss. We've faced exactly that in rare earth processing, and the United States has copious quantities of rare earth minerals. The difficulty is getting them into finished products is in some cases a 98% onshore Chinese monopoly, meaning that China can impose export controls, and those affect the entire world, including all kinds of advanced products, fiber optic cables, lasers, satellite components, and we find to our shock that we've just got no capacity to replace those.
So moving from competing with China to ensuring that America doesn't start to look more like China, the FCC has to analyze public interest served by these major media mergers. Do you think that fighting against censorship should be part of that public interest analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So the media regulation world in the United States is kind of funny because it's broadcast centric. And let me unpack that a little bit because, for most people, you turn on the TV, that's TV. You don't necessarily, the interface is so good. It's like an iPhone. You don't have to think about how the apps fit together. You just, pick an app. It's a little bit the same with TV. You don't have to think about, is it broadcast TV? Is it a cable system? Is it network? Is it a local broadcaster with an affiliation agreement? All of these different things are connected under the hood, and we only reach regulation in the FCC world if we're talking about over-the-air free broadcast. The theory behind this legally, that the Supreme Court is, so far not unseated, is that when you broadcast, you're preventing anyone else from broadcasting on that frequency. And therefore, a license to broadcast is a license to suppress the speech of other people. Therefore, there's a heightened public interest in that. So in the United States, we regulated broadcasters because there can only be so many broadcasters on the air in a particular city. But we never regulated newspapers. That would violate the First Amendment. And what we're finding is that in the online world and in the cable world, the world of content has gone in a different direction, and we aren't exposed to the same kind of public interest communications that we were always able to mandate for broadcasters because of their special place in the role of speech of others. You put it all together, and I would say the decreasing role of broadcast, that means the decreasing role of all regulated media in the United States. And because of that, it becomes more and more difficult to reach questions of free speech. But should it be a consideration in mergers? Absolutely. We want to protect what little regulated free speech we have, rather than moving to a world where the platform controls 100% of the content.
It's such a good explanation that in broadcast it is necessarily zero sum, and so you have to delve into those types of questions. But consumers are finding those lines blurred more and more frequently. ABC is a typical broadcaster. They had to pay a settlement after defaming President Trump, as a matter of fact. But now you've got this merger with ABC's Hulu product and Fubo product. What would be the type of involvement that the FCC would have in reviewing public interest in a matter like that?
You know, I wish I had a better answer for you. The short answer is that it's the Wild West online. We can refer to general principles of competition law, and at that point, it might be the role of the Department of Justice or the Federal Trade Commission to step in and say there's unfair competition, potential price gouging against consumers, too much market concentration, those kinds of general trade arguments that would be applicable to any industry merger. But when it comes to the FCC, we really have very, very little power over what's done online. You might remember back in the first Trump administration, about the summer of 2020, the administration opened the question of what it would look like to reform Section 230. At the time, that was sometimes very inaccurately characterized as an attack on free speech. What it really was an attempt to create content-neutral guardrails for the Section 230 protections. So I thought that was a good initiative at the time. It relied on Chevron deference, which we don't have anymore since last summer's Loper Bright decision. So if someone wants to open that question up, they're going to have to approach it a different way.
FCC Commissioner Nathan Simington, thank you so much for coming on the program and explaining the very important work of this government entity. I will ask you this last question. You know, we're here on day 100. If you look 100 days forward from now, what's some of the work you hope that the FCC will have been able to accomplish and add to President Trump's great legacy?
Well, that's a fantastic question. And as you'll notice, Chairman Carr, I get used to calling him Commissioner Carr, but he's the chairman now. Chairman Carr hit the ground running. We already are working on several major spectrum items. Those are really exciting. We've opened up the question for the first time at the Commission of what GPS backup should look like in the event of GPS interdiction. That's the kind of thing that most people don't need to think about because their GPS works day to day. But you see increasing use of GPS hijacking, spoofing, and interdiction for cargo robberies, for example. So we want to make sure that law enforcement have the tools they need, and we're backing that up. There are a lot of reforms like that that are technical, under the hood, but really important for keeping Americans safe and for assuring continuity of service in all of the things that we enjoy. And in addition, Chairman Carr is working to open up lots of bandwidth and to continue increasing the quality of service across many wireless services, including phones. So I'm really excited.
FCC Commissioner Nathan Simington, thanks so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure.